Considering your father-in-law was a director at a major company, I'm curious about how much inheritance he might have left behind, John inquired, trying to mask his curiosity. I sighed internally but maintained a cheerful smile. I heard it's $54,000, I replied. John looked shocked. My name is Catherine. John and I have been married for 20 years and our son left for college this year. Life with just the two of us is quiet but manageable. On weekends, John joins his colleagues for football and practices all day. I work part-time and spend my days off gardening or attending yoga with my friends. Even though we do different things, I think we're a typical couple for our age. However, something terrible disrupted our peaceful life as a couple. It started with a message I received from a friend who attends yoga with me. Attached to the message was a photo. I'm at the station now, but isn't this your husband, Catherine? I hesitated, but when I opened the photo, even from a distance, I could clearly tell it was John. He was walking hand in hand with another woman. My heart pounded. Could John be cheating? He said he was going for football practice in preparation for tomorrow's match, but was that a lie? I think it's my husband, I replied. My friend responded immediately, what will you do? Do you want to come over? After a moment of hesitation, I replied, no, I'm good. I'll talk to my husband. I closed the phone and sat down on a sofa. I had no motivation to do anything, and the only thought in my head was, what should I do? I could ask John, but I was afraid. What if he really was cheating? Thinking of divorce, especially when I only have a part-time job to support myself, made me think that I couldn't possibly go through all that. If I pretended not to know, I could continue living a peaceful life like before, but the idea of pretending and the ambiguity bothered me deeply. I don't know how long I sat like that, but I was jolted back to reality by the sound of the front door. It was already 7 in the evening. What's wrong? Why haven't you turned on the lights? John asked, surprised, as he turned on the living room lights. Oh, sorry, I fell asleep, I said. John laughed in disbelief and began washing his uniform in the washing machine. Seeing that, I realized he must have been exercising and wondered if the earlier photo might have been a mistake. If you're tired, do you want to eat out tonight? John suggested. I nodded eagerly, hoping that spending time together would help ease my uneasy feelings. Did you stop by anywhere else today besides football? I asked. Not really. Why? He responded. Just wondering. You mentioned wanting new shoes recently, so I thought you might have gone shopping for them. Oh, I haven't bought them yet, he said. With that, our conversation ended. The John in front of me seemed just like how he has always been. They say everyone has at least 3 doppelgangers in the world. Perhaps the man in the photo was one of them. However, once I began to suspect him, it was difficult for me to stop. I often found myself dumping him during his late-night overtimes or sudden overnight business trips. Bad things do happen. One day, on my way home from my part-time job, I stopped by the supermarket to buy ingredients for dinner. My phone rang, and I took it out of my bag, stepping into a less crowded aisle. The name displayed on the screen made me frown. It was my brother's name. Though I occasionally communicated with my sister-in-law during events like our children's school enrollments or graduations, I hadn't spoken to my brother in years. These sudden phone calls from relatives are often not good news. Hello, I answered hesitantly. I answered the call. What I heard from my brother was distressing. Our father's health was worsening. He had suddenly collapsed at work and had been rushed to the hospital. After some detailed exams, the doctors informed him that our father didn't have much time left. My mother had passed away from an illness a few years ago, and although my brother and his wife had offered to live with our father afterward, he had refused and continued to live alone, seemingly in good health. The last time I spoke to him, he sounded fine, so this news was truly surprising. After telling my brother I would visit soon, I hung up the phone and took a deep breath to calm my heart. When I told John, who came home from work that night, he looked really sad. I see, your father. Don't worry about things here. You should go see him, John said. Encouraged by his words, I went to see my father the next day. Dad, what happened? Are you okay? I asked. Oh, Catherine, I suddenly felt dizzy and couldn't get up. It must be old age, I guess. Sorry for making you worry, he said. His usually loud and boisterous voice sounded weak, causing pain in my heart. Though he looked pale, he didn't seem critically ill. Catherine, did something happen? Did you and John have a fight? He asked suddenly. Taken aback by his question, I didn't know how to respond. My father gave a wry smile. You're just like your mother, holding things in. Live as your heart desires. Not knowing what the future holds, for a parent, seeing their child's smiling face is the greatest happiness. Realizing the truth in his words, I was deeply moved. Although I wanted to talk to my father a little longer, he told me he was tired, so I decided to leave for the day. The visit lasted only about 15 minutes, but just thinking that he could be so exhausted from such a short time made tears roll down my cheeks. As I sat on the sofa near my father's room, waiting for my tears to stop, a man in a white coat sat next to me. "Are you here to visit your father? I'm the doctor in charge." "Oh, I'm so sorry. How embarrassing," I said, quickly taking out a handkerchief to wipe away my tears. Taking a closer look at the doctor, he seemed to be around my age with a kind face that made me feel at ease. "It's all right. It must have been a shock for you. Do you have any questions?" he asked. With his encouragement, I started to ask various questions about my father's condition and what to expect in the future. Despite repeating the same questions multiple times, he never looked annoyed and explained everything in detail until a nurse came, saying, "Sir, we need you." Thanks to him, even though I still felt sad, my heart was somewhat at ease. After returning home and recalling my conversation with my father, I decided to call the friend who had sent me the photo. I wanted to discuss the suspicions I had about my husband's affair. "I've been worried I might have done something unnecessary by telling you that. I'm sorry for causing you pain," my friend said. "No, I'm glad you told me. I've finally come to terms with John's suspected affair, but I have no idea what to do," I confessed. Chuckling, my friend shared some advice. "Actually, my husband is a lawyer. He said there are many clients consulting him about divorces due to affairs. I'll ask him for advice." Hearing this, I felt comforted knowing I wasn't the only one struggling. My friend immediately took action, telling me it was best to gather evidence of the affair and that I could use a private detective agency to do so. She even recommended a few agencies and offered to go with me if I felt anxious, making me realize how invaluable true friends are. From then on, between visiting my father and working part-time, my days were quite busy. At the same time, my husband started saying he was getting busier with work. Overtime and business trips noticeably increased, and his suspicious behavior had me eagerly awaiting the investigation results. 2 weeks later, I finally received the awaited results at the detective agency. The investigator hesitated before speaking. "It's true that he's having an affair." Surprisingly, I accepted the reality without panicking or feeling devastated. In fact, knowing the truth brought a sense of relief, dispelling my previous uneasiness. They showed me numerous photos and explained his activities over the past 2 weeks. There were also audio recordings, and the situation was worse than I had imagined. To begin with, his football games were only once a week, always in the morning for just 2 hours. The other employees always headed home right after the game, as they had families waiting. However, John spent all his remaining time with his mistress. At times, she would even wait for him at a diner near the football court. He deliberately washed his jersey, claiming he used it during the game, to ensure his lie wasn't caught. All his claims of overtime and business trips were fabricated just to spend time with her. The most shocking audio recording revealed him discussing with his mistress about getting a divorce once he inherited his money, predicting my father's passing in a month or so. They had already discussed pre-booking an apartment near the train station. His recent busyness was related to preparing for their new life together, making reservations for furniture and appliances, and even planning a premarital trip next month. All this left me feeling dizzy. The fact that my husband was eagerly waiting for my father to pass away destroyed any remaining love or affection I had for him. My only feeling was the increasing desire to divorce him. I paid a significant amount to the detective agency, took all the data, and decided to leave it with my friend for safekeeping. When I mentioned hiring a lawyer, they immediately agreed and offered to introduce me to someone they knew. However, I had used all my money on the detective agency and was hesitant to touch our shared finances. After some contemplation, I decided to swallow my pride and consult my brother about it. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" he exclaimed, annoyed. Thankfully, he generously offered to cover the expected legal fees. I had a meeting with a lawyer and discussed my desire to work full-time or as a regular employee at my part-time job. I was told they could hire me as a contract employee, which gave me hope regarding my financial situation. With everything now in place, I started thinking about how to broach the subject of divorce. One midnight, I received a call from my brother. He was calling to tell me that our father had passed away. I woke up John, and we rushed to the hospital. John briefly visited my father, greeted my brother and his wife, and said some comforting words to me. He then returned home by himself. Everything after that happened so quickly that I can hardly remember. There was the wake, the funeral, meeting our relatives, and basically, I had no time to grieve. Even after the funeral, there was the matter of sorting out the house, discussing inheritance, and handling the legal aspects of my father's estate. My brother, his wife, and I were all exhausted. John, however, kept saying he was busy with work and didn't help at all. Despite my father having just passed away, John went out to play football on the weekend. My brother and his wife were visibly frustrated, but they knew about my intention to divorce him and refrained from saying anything. With so much going on, I had to postpone the divorce. It wasn't until about 6 months later that things took a major turn. Finally, all procedures related to my father were completed, and the inheritance amount was confirmed. "By the way, has your father's inheritance come through yet?" John asked. "It's scheduled to be transferred tomorrow." "Why do you ask?" I replied. "Well, your father was a director of a major company. I was just curious about how much inheritance he'd leave behind." John tried to sound casual. I sighed internally but hid my true feelings and just smiled brightly. "I heard it's about $54,000. "That much?" he exclaimed. "Yes, Dad must have worked hard to save that much. I just got a call today from the lawyer saying everything's ready. It'll be transferred tomorrow, so maybe we can go out and eat something delicious to celebrate," I said, emphasizing the fact that it would be transferred the next day. John seemed lost in thought. The next day after John had gone to work, I conspicuously placed the bank book on the desk. When I returned from work, as expected, the bank book was gone, and instead, a signed divorce paper was there. I hadn't anticipated things to go this smoothly, so while thinking he took the bait, I headed to my lawyer handling my divorce and explained the current situation. I decided not to return home, instead heading straight to my family home where my father had passed away. Most of my belongings were already there, and the things where I lived with John were shared, and how to handle them would be decided later. Probably John and his mistress would end up living there. Having already submitted the divorce papers, there was no reason to contact my estranged husband. The only thing left was a potential claim for damages for his affair from my lawyer. However, since they couldn't contact him, nothing could be done at the moment. But 3 days after I returned to my family home, I received a call from John. "Catherine, what's going on? There's no money in the bank account. Where's the inheritance and where are you?" John demanded. "Inheritance is mine. Why would you use it?" I decided to play dumb for the time being. By asking about my whereabouts, it seemed John had returned to our home. I needed to contact my lawyer immediately. "Anyway, why isn't the $54,000 in your bank account?" "Did you take my bank account?" John asked. "I was planning to change the account for my salary deposit, but it disappeared. I've been looking for it." "Don't mess with me. We're married, it's a shared asset. You should share it with me." I wished he wouldn't yell over the phone. It hurt my ears. The inheritance is an individual asset, not a shared one. Plus, I've already filed for divorce. We're no longer a married couple. Please stop contacting me. I won't return home. It's okay for you to live there with your mistress. I could hear John catching his breath, but I hung up and immediately relayed his whereabouts to the law firm. That night, I received several calls from John, but I ignored them all and enjoyed a drink by myself. Having endured the suspicions of his affair for almost a year, I deeply appreciated the peacefulness I was experiencing. After a good night's sleep, I checked my phone and was shocked at the sheer volume of missed calls. I assumed my lawyer must have contacted him, causing him to panic. Hesitantly checking the messages, some were aggressive, like, "What do you mean by damages for the affair? If you knew, you should have said so." Others were apologetic. "Catherine, I'm sorry. It was my fault. I want to talk things over." Without replying, I left my phone behind and headed to work. In my bag was a new phone with a number John wouldn't know. This would be my main phone from now on. I had John's personality figured out, so I was well prepared. Later, my lawyer informed me that John insisted on discussing this face-to-face, so I decided it was time for a confrontation. I expected this and felt it was better to settle matters swiftly. I chose a family restaurant with semi-private booths for our discussion to avoid any public attention. As expected, John and his mistress arrived on time. Seeing John after months, he looked somewhat tired. Was it just my imagination? I had seen photos of his mistress, but it was my first time seeing her in person. She had her hair up in a bun and wore casual clothes. Her youthful face made me think she was a student, but I knew from my investigation that she was 25 and worked at a cake shop. I couldn't comprehend what such a cute girl saw in a 50-year-old man. "Catherine, what's going on?" "There's no inheritance, and now there's a claim for damages. I'm completely lost," John said, bewildered. Both my lawyer and I couldn't help but chuckle at his words. "The inheritance is what my father left for me, John. You have no right to it. As for the damages, it's because our divorce is due to your affair. You both owe compensation for the pain you caused me," I explained. "It's not about the affair, it's due to our incompatible personalities. Besides, it wasn't you who brought up the divorce, I did. So the affair doesn't matter," John retorted. Hearing such nonsense made me want to pull my hair out. I knew he wasn't the brightest, but I didn't expect him to lack basic common sense to this extent. The one at fault can't initiate the divorce. It's not about who brings it up first. It's about you having an affair. If that's true, you understand that you're in the wrong, right? Also, I'll be demanding compensation from her too." "What?" Why me? Despite her cute appearance, the mistress sounded very defiant and sharp. Is that true? John looked at the lawyer as if clinging to hope. Unfortunately, it is true, the lawyer confirmed. You said I'd be getting money. I wasn't told I'd have to pay. I'm going home, and since I'm divorcing you, this has nothing to do with me, she shouted, grabbing her bag and storming out of the restaurant. It was embarrassing as other customers turned to look at our table. We know where she works, so it'll be fine, the lawyer said with a reassuring smile, causing John's face to go pale. Perhaps he realized he couldn't escape. You know, that girl is quite headstrong. She used to be a good girl when we were having an affair. She was always smiling around me and would cry, saying she'd miss me when it was time for me to leave. John rambled. Even though he was talking about their affair, I didn't know how to react. After we started living together, her cooking wasn't great, and she constantly wanted new bags or clothes. It was cute at first, but being married to her was not what I expected. Even though they'd only been remarried for about a month, complaints about her started pouring out of John's mouth. I've realized something. I've always been comparing her to you, Catherine. You're skilled at housework, great at cooking, and you always waited for me to come home without a single complaint. So would you consider giving us another chance? I was left in disbelief, unable to keep my mouth shut. I never anticipated this turn of events, and even the lawyer seemed too stunned to speak. There's no way. Come on, I'll change. I promise I'll never cheat again, John pleaded. You cheated on me while using the excuse of being busy at work, didn't you? How can I believe anything you say? I countered. John lowered his head, repeating, I want to start over. You said you were busy with work when my father was dying. He was in critical condition for about a month, but you never visited him even once. Even though I was having a difficult time, you were cheating. After he passed away, were you just waiting for the inheritance? I noticed our drawer being opened several times where we kept our bank book. You probably planned to leave once the inheritance came in, right? With the divorce papers already filled out? As I listed each fact, John began to tremble. He probably never thought he'd get caught. You had a reservation to buy a nice apartment already, right? But unfortunately, since you didn't get the inheritance, you had to cancel. I assume the old house we lived in must have been unbearable for her, I continued. How do you know? John asked, his voice shaking. I have plenty of evidence. Are you thinking that if we get remarried, you won't have to pay the compensation? With that, John fell silent. I must have struck a nerve. Realizing he was only after my money made me feel sad and disappointed. If there's nothing more to discuss, I'm leaving, I said, standing up. Wait, John grabbed my arm as I tried to leave. Catherine, you're the most important thing to me. Please, I beg you, let's start over. John's eyes were filled with tears. I'll never betray you again, and I'll do all the chores. Please come back to me. Unable to contain his emotions, John began to sob uncontrollably. Come on, don't make a scene. Aren't you and your mistress newlywed? Why don't you two sort things out? Let's just move on with our separate lives. Turns out she's been cheating on me. She seems to have married me for my money. Without money, I'm just an old man. Seeing my ex-husband crumbling to the floor, crying, was undeniably pathetic, but I felt no obligation to comfort him. People had heard our conversation, and it was painfully embarrassing to witness everyone whispering about John. Leaving my crying ex-husband behind, I picked up the bill, and my lawyer and I left. Later, as the two of them adamantly refused to pay compensation, I consulted with John's parents over the phone. Having had little interaction with my rather shy in-laws who lived far away, this was my first call to them since thanking them for attending my father's funeral. To my surprise, I discovered John hadn't told his parents about our divorce or his remarriage to his mistress. This revelation left his parents in shock, with my ex-mother-in-law becoming bedridden from the strain. Give us some time, we're not sure what to do, was their unsure response, making it clear I couldn't rely on them. However, the next day, my father-in-law brought his brother to confront John. His brother, compared to John, was a lively, talkative, and cheerful man. John had often grumbled to me about how intimidating he was during family gatherings. Whatever transpired, his strong-willed brother made John agree to the compensation payment. Then his brother decided John would be taken back to the countryside. Tearfully, my father-in-law informed me of this decision. Since both in-laws were over 80 and had no income, they promised John would work at a factory owned by a relative nearby and pay me the compensation. As for John's mistress, her whereabouts were unknown, but since her workplace was known, they contacted her there. She shouted, "Don't contact my workplace." However, I spoke with a woman claiming to be the manager and was informed of an astonishing fact. It seems that the person John was referring to when he said, "She's cheating on me," was the husband of the store manager, and she was apparently preparing to sue them. I was assured that John's mistress would never escape justice, and true to that word, a few months later, I received the compensation payment. When I visited the cake shop to express my gratitude as expected, the mistress was nowhere in sight. Naturally, she was fired from the cake shop. She had dreams of becoming a pastry chef, but that's now believed to be impossible. Currently, to repay the compensation, she's juggling multiple jobs, and according to the store manager, she can often be seen at a nearby construction site. Out of sheer curiosity, I took a glance and noticed her without makeup, sweaty, and being yelled at by an older man while she worked. Having to pay compensation for the two affairs she had, she must be heaply in debt. I'm not sure how many years it'll take her to repay it, but she got karma for destroying someone's family. When I told my son about the divorce, he was genuinely surprised but said something along the lines of, "It's your life, you should live it as you see fit," which was a relief. My biggest concern had always been how my son would react, and with me approaching 50, I thought there'd be no chance for love or even remarriage. But lately, there's someone I've been interested in. He's the doctor who took care of my father in his final moments. Every time I visited the hospital, we'd end up chatting, and I found him to be very nice and wonderful. After the divorce, during one of my solo trips to the shopping mall, we bumped into each other, and in our conversation, I discovered that he was also divorced. We connected even more over our similar experiences. We've been out for meals a couple of times, and I always feel very comfortable around him. I don't know what the future holds, but I still hope and strive for happiness in my life.
Constructing your own home stands as a monumental achievement in life's journey. But for me, Adeline, aged 30, this milestone was a harbinger of sorrow, marking the crumbling of my marriage. My family unit comprised my 35-year-old spouse, Yuri, and our cherished 3-year-old Sarah. The vision was clear, to erect the dwelling of our dreams. Eagerly, I shared our aspiration with my loved ones, yearning for their support, anticipating smooth progress. Yet reality proved harsh. While others may sail through such endeavors seamlessly, my path diverged. Recent times had been fraught with obstacles in materializing our dream abode, compounded by interference from Yuri's parents. The unraveling commenced on a fateful day when I entrusted Sarah to their care. Yuri and I, slaves to our professions, scarcely savored moments together in the week. Our weekends were devoured by property tours and consultations with architects. Bringing Sarah along proved futile. Her restlessness eclipsed the joy of exploration. Thus, we relied on my parents, conveniently close by, to tend to her. Then came the morning when their news shattered my routine. My father's ailment mandated a hospital visit, rendering them unable to care for Sarah. There seemed no alternative. Our plans for the day hung precariously on the edge of cancellation. Yet, in a surprising turn, my husband proposed, why not ask my parents to look after her? His suggestion stirred an unexpected turmoil within me, the prospect of discord looming. Truth be told, my relationship with my in-laws was strained. They possessed a notion that familial ties equated to unchecked liberties. Since when was such behavior permissible? Moreover, burdening them with the sudden responsibility of caring for a toddler felt intrusive. However, postponing our plans risked stalling progress on our dream home. After much internal debate, I relented, leaving my daughter in their care. Once my errands were done, I sought to ease any potential tensions, purchasing lavish treats and tokens of appreciation before returning to their doorstep. Perhaps swayed by my gestures, my in-laws welcomed us warmly, expressing gratitude for the gifts as we bid our farewells. Yet on the journey home, I overheard my daughter's innocent chatter. "I'm going to get a new house," she declared, her voice brimming with excitement, before inquiring, "Where will Grandma and Grandpa's rooms be in the new house?" "Oh, Sarah, what are you saying? Did Grandma and Grandpa ask you about their rooms? What did you tell them?" I probed gently, noticing her reluctance to speak further, her gaze fixated on the stuffed penguin cradled in her arms. "Oh no," she murmured, a hint of uncertainty clouding her features. Sighing softly, I attempted to clarify the misunderstanding. "Sweetheart, Grandma and Grandpa aren't moving in with us. Perhaps they were just curious if we have a guest room for them when they visit," I reassured her, hoping to dispel any confusion. From that day onward, my in-laws' visits became more frequent, encroaching even on weeknights and holidays. Currently residing in a modest apartment to save for our future home, their presence always seemed to revolve around our plans and aspirations. Whenever they arrived, my husband eagerly presented them with the blueprints and documents detailing our dream house, his enthusiasm unwavering despite my reservations. "Why do you always have to show them?" His question, tinged with disappointment, left me feeling guilty. But it was my mother-in-law who truly put me on edge. Her inquiries felt akin to an interrogation, each query delivered with the weight of judgment. This design for the kitchen seems impractical. You should reconsider. And we need more tatami rooms. They're essential for comfort as we age. Also, one child's room won't suffice if you plan to expand your family. Have you thought about the declining birth rate? Her words pierced through me like accusations in a courtroom. Wow, definitely not the declining birth rate part, I interjected, unable to suppress my frustration. She couldn't care less about that. She was waiting for my response, Adeline. Well, given our prior discussions and the arrangements made with our contractor, the layout is already finalized based on our family's needs, I retorted, my tone laced with annoyance. But what about the furniture? Appliances? She pressed further, her role as a self-proclaimed interior designer evident in her relentless scrutiny. Drawing on my experiences and observations, I defended our choices. I've seen plenty of homes and rooms through my extensive network and discerning eye. This house, this room, doesn't meet your standards, but it's what works for us. Things aren't perfect, but we're doing our best, I countered, frustration simmering beneath the surface. Attempting to diffuse the tension with a hint of sarcasm, I suggested, maybe we should split the costs and make it a two-family house, since you seem to have so much input. Her reaction was explosive. Give money to our son and daughter-in-law. You're a gold digger. A two-family house. Ridiculous. With emotions running high, my in-laws left abruptly, their departure marked by bitter words exchanged in the heat of the moment. Go home. You're not my parents. You're my in-laws. I don't owe you anything. Stop acting like my bosses. I finally snapped, the weight of their intrusion too much to bear. Later that evening, after tucking our daughter into bed, my husband approached me with a weary tone. My parents are just trying to help. Try not to shut them out, he urged, a hint of exasperation in his voice. I'm not trying to shut them out, but they meddle in every aspect of our home. They always push us into corners. They treat us like puppets and mock our decisions, I rebutted, frustration seeping into my words. It's natural. They're parents. Just think about how you'd feel if it were our daughter, he reasoned, his tone softening. You know I'm not always the most compassionate person, but they need to understand boundaries, I retorted, feeling the weight of his dismissal. With his back turned to me, he fell silent, unwilling to engage further. While they may be your parents, they're not part of our household. They don't contribute financially, so they don't get to dictate, I asserted, my anger mounting at his unreasonable stance, making sleep elusive that night. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, our home was complete. Excitement filled the air as we settled into our new abode. Yet my husband's revelation shattered the tranquility. My parents are moving in today. They'll take the larger room on the second floor, and we'll take the smaller one, he declared casually. What? Hold on. We agreed one of those rooms would be Sarah's. I never agreed to living together. None of this was discussed, I protested, incredulity coloring my voice. They've already seen the room. Don't worry, they'll like it, he assured me, his nonchalant tone aggravating my frustration. Your parents have seen it too. When? I queried, my bewilderment palpable. The day before we went to see the house, he admitted casually. Wait a minute, so let me get this straight. Your parents visited the house before we did? I pressed, struggling to comprehend. Yeah, they wanted to take a look, so I gave them my key. What harm could it do? It's not like they damaged anything, he replied, his tone dismissive as he returned to wiring the TV. What harm? It's a big deal, I snapped, avoiding eye contact as I abandoned the kitchen and retreated upstairs. Locking the door behind me, I sought solace in solitude, my mind a tumult of frustration and confusion. Grateful for the distraction of tidying up after the move, I stewed in resentment toward my husband and in-laws, especially given their sudden decision to move in with us. I can't stand being around them for another minute, but we've just made a huge investment in this house. I need to keep calm, think about what I say, and consider my daughters and my future, I resolved, sequestering myself in contemplation as I awaited their arrival. True to my husband's word, they appeared early in the afternoon, unloading their belongings from a truck. They could at least greet us. They have no sense of decency. And look at this mess. You haven't even cleaned up yet. You're utterly useless, my mother-in-law criticized, her words stinging with disdain. After much grumbling, my in-laws barged into our freshly constructed home, acting as if they were entitled to do so. Eavesdropping on the commotion from upstairs, I emerged from my room and made my way to the front door. "I wasn't aware that we'd be sharing our home with you as well," I stated resignedly, my tone unexpectedly icy. My father-in-law, clearly irked by my tone, wasted no time in shifting the blame onto me. "I mentioned to Yuri that it shouldn't be an issue, didn't I?" "But it is an issue. I only found out this morning from Yuri that he invited you both to live with us, and I have no desire to reside with such disrespectful individuals," I asserted firmly. "Whatever Yuri decides is fine. Are you implying you can defy your husband?" he retorted. "Yes, I am. Are you suggesting I'm an impertinent wife? If you don't like it, why don't you just leave?" I knew this was futile. The clash in perspectives has been apparent for some time now, rendering communication impossible with these individuals. I mused silently, contemplating my next move. Before I could form a response, my husband burst in, his expression fraught with panic. "Adeline, what are you doing? Don't argue with my parents." "Argue? There's no parity here. I've been subjected to unilateral mistreatment simply because I'm your wife, and now you're blaming me again. Like father, like son, it seems, Yuri," I retorted sharply. "I can't live with your parents," I stated firmly. "Don't embarrass me. You're my wife. You're supposed to obey me," he insisted. "I'm a person before I am your wife. You can't expect blind obedience," I countered, my resolve unwavering. Listening in, my father-in-law interjected angrily. "I won't accept that kind of wife for you. I won't allow her in my house," he declared vehemently. To my astonishment, my husband echoed his sentiments. "Being my wife takes precedence. If you can't tend to my parents, perhaps we should consider divorce." "I agree with my father," my husband affirmed. "Understood. Then let's proceed with a divorce," I declared resolutely, the weight of my decision hanging heavy in the air. Even as I spoke, I silently prayed that my smartphone, nestled in my pocket, was recording every word exchanged. As the reality of our impending separation sank in, my in-laws reacted with incredulity. "If we're to become strangers, then return the $259,778.88 loan I provided for the house construction immediately," they demanded, their shock palpable. My husband paled at their words, his expression one of sheer horror. Calmly, I addressed the confusion. "There appears to be a misunderstanding. Yuri didn't contribute a cent to the house. It was solely funded by my savings because he had none. Despite our agreement to split expenses evenly and save the surplus, he squandered money without saving a dime," I explained, laying bare the truth for my bewildered in-laws to comprehend. "Oh, come on, Adeline, you can't do this," my husband exclaimed, disbelief etched on his face. "It's the truth. When it came to buying the house, he wouldn't budge. He insisted it be in my name. That's why I loaned you the money, remember? I have a signed AU, so you can't deny it," I asserted firmly. "Oh no." Their expressions frozen in shock, I swiftly packed my suitcase and overnight bag, filling them with essentials, clothes, and my daughter's treasured toys, ensuring her favorite penguin was securely tucked under my arm. Loading everything into my Mini Cooper, I wasted no time starting the engine. With a heavy heart, I bid farewell to the house I had only just begun to call home. Hastily collecting my daughter from daycare, I sped toward my parents' house. Their surprise at my sudden appearance, clad in sweatpants and laden with luggage, was evident. "If this is inconvenient or too sudden, I can stay at a hotel," I offered tentatively, but they quickly intervened, urging me to stay. I sensed their determination to shield me from harm. Sharing my plight with them, I explained my decision to leave my husband, who had nothing but scorn for me, and expressed my desire to provide a stable environment for my daughter. They pledged their full support and generously offered me a place to stay. Despite my employment, it was a lifeline I gratefully accepted, knowing I had allies in my corner. That evening, I meticulously documented every detail of my tumultuous interactions with my husband and in-laws. Saving audio recordings from my phone onto my computer and external drives, I diligently compiled evidence. Utilizing my paid time and weekends, I visited numerous lawyers, determined to find one I could trust. Eventually, I found a legal representative whom I felt confident in and submitted a formal request. My days were consumed by these tasks, and before I knew it, a week had flown by. Since the day I fled our once beautiful home, I'd been avoiding my husband, but one evening, as I left the office, he was waiting for me, though I wished to label him as my ex-husband. Until the divorce proceedings concluded, he remained my spouse in legal terms. With little to say to him, I suggested we find a public space for a conversation to avoid any potential outbursts. Ever cautious, I discreetly activated the recording function on my phone before we entered a nearby coffee shop. "Is there something you want to discuss?" I asked him calmly, steeling myself for whatever response he might offer. "Well, it's about the house. I want you to have it, Adeline. I'll remove my name from the lease. Can't we just forget about the money?" he proposed, his tone tentative. "I'm sorry, I can't do it. I can't bear to live in that house anymore. Your parents, they were the first to set foot in it, weren't they?" I stated firmly. "Why does that matter?" he countered. "It matters to me, so I can't," I reiterated. Taking a sip of coffee, I scrutinized my soon-to-be ex-husband. His disheveled appearance spoke volumes, unkempt hair, stubble on his chin, and a worn-out complexion. Despite his suit, his shirt looked neglected, lacking the care of ironing or dry cleaning. I couldn't help but wonder how he was coping, but fatigue etched across his face told its own story. "Adeline, please, I can't repay such a substantial sum so easily," he pleaded. "You were aware of the amount. I even suggested we share ownership of the house, despite it being mine. But you refused to compromise," I reminded him. "I thought it would be more like being landlords. And I didn't realize you were serious about the divorce. I thought it was just a threat," he confessed, desperation evident in his voice. "I am serious. I won't tolerate such disrespectful parents sticking around," I declared resolutely. "Oh no," he murmured, realization dawning upon him. "I need to go. Sarah is waiting for me," I asserted, my unease palpable. "I'll leave when you're finished. I'm going to take care of Sarah," my ex-husband countered, his words sending a shiver down my spine. Hastily, I retreated to my parents' house, urging them to be vigilant against any attempts to forcibly take Sarah. A few days later, a call from the daycare center sent me into a panic. A couple resembling my in-laws had appeared, attempting to collect Sarah. Racing to the daycare, I arrived just in time, thankfully having alerted the staff beforehand. They had kept my in-laws confined to a separate room, denying them access to Sarah. Yet upon my arrival, I was met with a barrage of accusations. "Give me back my grandchild, you thieving cat," my mother-in-law bellowed. "I'm not a thief," I retorted indignantly. "If you're not a thief, you're a fraud. If you're not a thief, you're a swindler. Otherwise, how could you have amassed so much money at your age?" she accused, her words laced with venom. "No, all the money I lent to Yuri was my own. It's rightfully mine, a combination of my personal earnings, contributions from my parents, and a gift from my late grandmother," I clarified. "A gift?" my mother-in-law echoed incredulously. "Why didn't you think to gift our son before your grandmother passed away? You could still do it now, couldn't you?" she pressed. Caught off guard, my father-in-law let out a grunt before falling silent. My in-laws were ostentatious, valuing luxury above all else. Coming from a modest background, they lacked substantial savings or the inclination to gift large sums during their lifetime. "I'm sorry, but Yuri and I are divorcing. I'll be taking custody of Sarah and raising her alone. Please refrain from visiting the daycare. It's disruptive," I informed them firmly. With that, I hurriedly ushered Sarah into the car and returned to my parents' home. Despite my warnings, Yuri and his parents persisted in their visits. Each encounter was fraught with tension, with verbal abuse and attempts to physically restrain me becoming commonplace. I recorded every instance on my phone. About a month after my abrupt departure from our new home, I instructed my lawyer to request repayment of the debt and initiate divorce proceedings. While my ex-husband initially hesitated, particularly regarding custody arrangements for Sarah, a stern reminder of potential alimony charges for contesting the matter seemed to quell his resistance. Armed with ample evidence and facing a lack of savings on their part, I pursued the repayment of owed funds and secured custody of Sarah through the divorce proceedings. It was a lengthy process, exacerbated by complications in selling the house. Initially intended for Yuri and my in-laws, financial constraints forced them to list the property for sale at a loss. After numerous price reductions, a buyer was eventually found, but the sale proceeds were insufficient to cover the initial purchase price and associated costs. Resorting to bank loans to bridge the gap, my ex-husband found himself burdened with debt and without a home, forced to return to his parents' cramped residence. Adding to their woes, Yuri's sister, also divorced, moved back in with her 2 teenage sons, exacerbating tensions in the already crowded household. The resulting chaos and constant bickering became a notorious feature of the neighborhood. With their financial struggles hindering their ability to provide adequate child support, the courts intervened to limit their visitation rights. Thus, the tumultuous family no longer posed a threat to her peace of mind. 4 years have elapsed since those tumultuous times, and Sarah, now in the 2nd grade, brings joy to our lives every day. We reside in a rented space close to my parents' home, where their support provides solace, especially on days when work keeps me late. The thought of continuing to raise Sarah with their assistance, sans remarriage, had crossed my mind. Yet unexpectedly, romance found me. I've been seeing a 36-year-old divorced man with a 1st-grade daughter, whom I often encountered during daycare drop-offs and pickups. Our casual conversations gradually blossomed into something deeper, culminating in his heartfelt confession of affection. Recently, we've been enjoying outings together, our daughters forming a natural bond during playdates. During one such outing, Sarah innocently voiced her dream of a future home where each of us would have our own space, along with a beloved family pet. Her words stirred something within me, igniting a flurry of emotions. With a proposal lingering in the air, I stand at a crossroads. Carefully considering my daughter's welfare and my own desires, I realize my heart has already made its decision. I gather Sarah in my arms, her innocence a beacon of hope, and declare, yes, I do want to build another home. But this time, let's do it together as a family,